don't want to be making content for robots.
I feel like you and I could talk about this for hours 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Welcome to another episode of Cup of Joe. Today we have Kieran Chrysler with us to go through some Google updates and some new information on SEO and how it all works. Thank you so much for joining us.
So excited to be here, Joe.
Awesome. So to start everything out, we're going to talk about Google updates. Mm-hmm. What is a Google update?
Effectively, a Google update is when Google will roll out a change to how their search algorithm works. So that will be how things appear in search when you as a consumer are typing in a query or a question into the Google search bar.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's pretty basic, but it gets kind of complicated on the SEO side of things. Realistically, as a consumer, Google updates are good because they're going to be showing you what is most important to you as a user. They're always trying to dial in what's going to be the most valuable and helpful thing for their end user, because Google search is the biggest product that Google has. So they want it to be as good as possible.
Sure.
So think about it from the perspective of you are trying to find a great restaurant in the city that you're going to visit. If you type something into Google and the first result is a page that's full of ads, a bunch of pop-ups, the layout doesn't make sense, and the information is bad.
Basically the way Google was 20 years ago.
Exactly. It's not a good experience for anybody. So Google updates are happening all the time now because they just want it to show you the best possible result for what you're doing.
Very cool. So can you tell us about some of the recent Google updates?
I can, yes. Basically, Google updates have been happening pretty consistently for the entirety that they've existed.
Sure.
The 2010s, we saw a lot of updates happening. They were big updates happening on a yearly basis that were changing functionally how the search engines worked. So as marketers, we remember this being backlinks became less important.
Yeah.
The Medic update had a lot of changes to how we were showing medical content.
Right.
So every year it was basically a giant functional change to how the search engine actually worked. The last 3 years, I guess 4 years, it's 2024 now,
Yeah.
We're seeing updates happening on a more frequent basis. However, they're not functionally changing what is important. What's changing is that one thing is important, and we're just really driving that home with every update. And what is the most important now is content that is helpful to humans. We don't want to be making content for robots. We're not making content for crawlers. We're making content that humans find helpful and will help humans get whatever they need to do done.
Very cool. So you briefly mentioned the Medic update.
Yes.
September of 2018, I believe, is when that
Yeah.
one came out. And we obviously talk about that one a lot because with that update specifically, it had to do with making sure that your information is actually medically accurate. Google will rank you better if your stuff is medically accurate. We talked a lot about plagiarism, different things like that, and how that had a negative effect. Now you're talking about the helpful content update. Does that make the Medic update obsolete? How did the two work together? What does all that look like?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the Medic update is obsolete, but it's more important now that your content is easy for the average person to read versus being a medical journal, if
Sure.
that makes sense. So if you're looking for something like, I have a headache, you don't want a medical journal about all the possible reasons you have a headache.
Sure.
You want some content written by someone who might know what they're doing that's going to tell you all of the potential reasons in a easy to consume way, and then have a call to action.
So it's still, hey, your information needs to be medically accurate, but let's make it concise and easily digestible.
Correct, yeah. Google knows that the average person reads at an 8th grade reading level, and they spend about 5 seconds on any given web page.
Very, very cool. So let's talk about some of the other algorithm updates that are a little bit more recent. I know
Yes.
we talked a lot about the EAT, Enterprise Authority and Trust.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like 4 years old now.
I can tell you about that. Fun fact, there's actually a second E now.
Okay.
It's experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trust now, so EEAT.
Cool.
Google is still not stating that it is critical. However, because the focus is on creating human-centric content for humans that they're going to find the most helpful, those are kind of the 4 things that are going to ensure that what you're creating and putting onto the internet is going to be the most useful for the average person.
Very cool. So in the senior living space, like what do all these algorithm updates mean for our customers?
So Effectively, the reason that it's important to keep on top of things is that things can change on a moment's notice now. We're seeing updates happen almost monthly at this point. So if you're not on top of them and being aware and making sure that everything you are creating is helpful, human-centric content, you may find that you're going to lose a lot of organic traffic because your listings could get deprioritized. You can not show up in search as often, and ultimately you would lose potential leads that way if you're not showing up highly.
Okay, cool. You'd mentioned earlier that these algorithm updates can just kind of happen with nobody really knowing that they're about to happen.
Yes.
That sounds very daunting and cool, but scary.
Yep.
So when we hear things like organizations have stated, I know that this just isn't true, but sometimes people say, I'm going to get you on the first spot on Google in whatever it is, 3 months or whatever else. And we're always just kind of like, that's not something people can promise. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Does Google actually have anything that states directly like that's not a thing?
They do have their best practice guidelines that are listed. There's kind of a SEO for beginners that they've actually just republished. So there's kind of new guidance. It's not new guidance. It's what we always knew.
Okay.
When it comes to updates and people saying that they can get you to the first page of Google quickly, there are basics that are going to be important to hit at every point, and a general framework in which you should build your website in order for it to be crawlable and more likely to show up highly. So these are things like ensuring that you have effective H1s, or the main heading on each of your pages is what you do and where you're doing it.
Sure.
It's not always the most sexy, it's not a tagline, but it is the most functional because Google crawlers will go to your page and say, great, you are doing assisted living in Florida. I know exactly what this is doing.
Sure.
Because it's expensive for them to crawl a website at a given time. Crawling is not a free kind of act on Google's part, as much as they need to know what's on the internet. It's kind of a big energy suck if you think about it, because the servers are constantly going to be looking through that. So
to that point, though, their search engine is all about making sure that it's showing up with the most relevant content. So how often do they just naturally crawl a site?
There's no hard and fast rule.
Okay.
This is where something like Google Search Console becomes a really effective kind of tool to be using.
Sure.
It's a way to submit your pages for indexing. It's a way to see if there are problems on your pages that are causing them to not be indexed. And overall, that's also a great way to see if there's an update happening, because there's a couple signifiers on that kind of tool side that can kind of help you suss out if there's an update happening, if it's unconfirmed.
Okay, cool. I feel like you've kind of answered this a little bit, but I'm going to get you to do it again. So, as an SEO specialist, what do you do to stay on top of these algorithms? Sorry, the updates, everything that's basically coming, and like, how do you, I guess, at the end of the day, support our customers through that? How do you adapt?
So much reading, honestly. I'm subscribed to a lot of SEO newsletters.
Okay.
So they are usually have quite a few people that are paying attention, sussing out things on like an instantaneous basis.
Yeah.
We also have a great team at Citizen that is always looking into different sources of SEO news, because there's quite a few different pockets all over the internet of people that are sharing case studies, things they're noticing on their sites, etc. So that can kind of help us understand if something's happening. And we have a lot of reporting tools at our disposal that can kind of help us to inform whether or not an update is happening. There's a couple signifiers we look for. Externally, there's also a ton of different things we can use. Something that we like to reference is there's a tool called Moz, similar to SEMrush. It's kind of keyword monitoring, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Moz is great because they have a weather tool, basically, that tells you search engine weather. So they'll have a little kind of, I'll show it to you here. So they have this tool that kind of just shows search engine volatility, so how quickly rankings are turning over. So we can see on February 8th specifically, which is floating above me here, we're seeing a huge spike in volatility. Generally, that is a signifier that there is an update ongoing. And we adapt by then looking into our clients and seeing, are we losing? Are we gaining? Are pages being de-indexed? Like, is there anything weird going on that might signify that we need to make action fast?
Cool. Very cool. I think you've given us a ton to go off of here. Is there anything else that you'd like our audience to know specifically about SEO or any updates or anything like that?
I think something that's important to note is that having a SEO optimized website is not the same thing as having an SEO program. You can...
Why do you say that? I'm just kidding.
You can build a site with SEO best practices in mind, and that's what you should be doing. But not monitoring constantly means that you can be affected anytime there's a Google update that rolls out.
Okay, so I'm going to throw it at you then.
Yeah.
When you build a website, what are the best practices you're talking about?
Ooh, my favorites, I mentioned H1s. If you don't have a good H1 with your service or...
What the heck is an H1, Kieran?
Heading, it's the first heading on a website.
Okay.
It's going to be the biggest...
The thing that says assisted living in Calgary, Alberta.
Yep, it's the first thing that comes up on a website. It should be the first thing that comes up on a website.
Sure.
Not only from a crawler perspective, because if a Google crawler comes through, they see your H1, they know exactly what you're about.
Sure.
It's also human-centric to have your H1s in the correct order and to have an appropriate amount of them from an accessibility standpoint. Because again, human-centric content, Google values accessibility. We want to make sure that websites are accessible to anyone finding them, be it by reading or in a screen reader, anything there. So you want to have one H1. That's why it's H1. You only have one of them. One. And then all your subsequent headings go down into, it's a logical order. You have H1s, that's your big one. H2 is your next heading. H3 would be a smaller one. And you just have them kind of nested together in a way that makes sense.
Cool.
So you don't want too many H2s. You want them to make sense. Think of it like formatting a Word document. You want your headers and subheaders to make sense.
Sure. Just a quick plug, on March 5th, Salim and I did a accessibility Cup of Joe as well. Feel free to watch that if you have any questions on accessibility. With that being said, so we also talked about duplicate content. Mm-hmm. We've obviously seen websites that are all built on one page. We've seen different things like that. When we think about best practices for creating a website, tell me about what your beliefs and what Google's beliefs are on that.
So you want to have your pages be specific and make sense.
Sure.
So for senior living specifically, sure, on your heading or your homepage, on your homepage you want to have kind of a holistic overview, a snapshot of what your business does. Okay. But you don't want to really get into the nitty-gritty of everything on that homepage in depth, because then your page is going to be cluttered, it's going to be hard to read. If you have too much going on, it doesn't make sense. Right. So that's where you want to have your site structure come in with individual location pages or community pages that kind of go into different communities, or completely separate URLs for your communities, just so you're not getting overly cluttered that way.
Yeah.
Another thing to think about is your service levels. So separate pages for assisted living, memory care, those kinds of things. Yeah. So you can really get into details and provide helpful content to your users. Because if they're looking for memory care, they don't really need to also be looking at dining options on that same page. Right. If you're on a page really doing research, you're going to be willing to navigate within the actual website structure.
Very cool. Very cool. And so with all of that being done, and then you have the additional SEO strategies, those additional SEO strategies, it sounds like, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but and correct me, I should say, if I'm wrong, because don't just forgive me. I'm going to need to be corrected on this one. Yeah. If your website is built with SEO best practices, that's awesome. It's a great foundation. It's a great start. But what an SEO strategy really does is it increases the likelihood of Google wanting to rank your organization because you were following all of those different algorithm updates in which you mentioned, but also you're adding additional value to the end user depending on what they're actually searching for. So as an example, let's say that you're a memory care community, but you don't have a blog, but then people are searching for something along the lines of, what are the best foods to feed somebody who has dementia? That blog will then have your business rank due to the fact that the content in that blog itself is strong and medically accurate and concise, etc. Is that
correct?
Am I on the right?
Yes. SEO is kind of an interesting discipline because it is truly a mix of so many different things. We've talked a lot about technical SEO today and how you use that kind of technical knowledge to offset Google updates.
Right.
But there is also so much to be said with having a strong content strategy that can kind of flesh out your knowledge and authority on topics related to your business,
Right.
as well as a local SEO level. So having SEO is really looking at all of those pieces and then being able to adapt them when Google, who runs the entire search engine that the world is powered on, is going to be changing things quickly and without warning.
Kieran, I feel like you and I could talk about this for hours, and we
Good.
probably should sign off here, but maybe do another episode one of these days.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for taking the time and for your breadth of knowledge. It was absolutely awesome having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Had
Thanks.
fun.
To our audience, thank you guys so much for joining Cup of Joe, and thank you again, Kieran, for joining us. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out through the website, or you can call us directly at 403-903-3703. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.